Today we're delighted to have three speakers from Menominee, Wisconsin, again, all of whom are very experienced educators. Dave and Kari Decker and Bonnie Shio will serve as a special discussant to Dave and Kari. As we begin today, I'd like to do just a little bit of context setting. In this series, we've been making an effort to record the historical progression of bringing the principles to life inside of schools with veteran pre-K educators who have been well grounded in the principles from anywhere from 40 years to perhaps 5. And in that spectrum of time, we have talked about before that from the very beginning, when Sid Banks was beginning to teach the principles publicly in Salt Spring, educators there were involved from day one. And we have heard some of those speakers already. We know that at that early phase, the integration of the principles in schools happened first because the individual educators were learning and living the principles. Their lives were changed by that, and they came to their work at the schools from that perspective of living a more peaceful and secure life, and as educators operated then from a place of health and hope and wisdom. It's accurate to say that that early phase was more focused on the internal or the spiritual understanding of the principles, and that it had not initially really focused on the psychological dimensions of the principles. That's important to understand because those early days created, in a sense, a legacy of reminding us what it is like to live from the principles in a very pure way and to embed that not only in your personal life, but in your professional life, which in this case was education. So at that point in time, there really wasn't a focus, for example, on organizing a system. There wasn't a focus on creating curriculum that an entire building or a school system would use. But we found that there were profound, shall we say, ordinary, everyday miracles that were happening both in the educators' lives and in the children's lives. And part of that story has been told before. Then as the second era began to unfold, there was a focus on explaining the principles from a psychological perspective. And we know that many of you who have participated in this webinar series were actually introduced to the principles knowing that there was a psychological way of teaching, shall I say, about the principles, and that it was important for the health of the helper to be really front and center so that living from the principles was still very, very important. And as we listen to Dave and Kari and Bonnie today, I think we have a special opportunity to focus on something that Sid Banks was consistent in saying throughout all of his years. And that was that the first order of business really is to live an ordinary life with your understanding of the principles. And then from there, if you end up teaching the principles, sharing the principles, it becomes a natural outgrowth. It's not something that you can teach without living the principles. Our speakers today have learned more recently, and you will hear their story shortly, but there is a blend of both the spiritual era and the psychological era, and thankfully, they come from the time when those two worlds of understanding the principles have been melded. And sometimes that's important because when one is working in education, no matter what country you're in, we know that we need to be delicate, thoughtful, and dedicated in terms of how we can introduce the principles in their totality, spiritually, psychologically, without upsetting the apple cart in the school system. You can be run out of town if you do this wrong. And Gary and I can tell stories where I got in a bit of trouble at one point. But as we begin today, I'd like you to meet Dave and Kari Decker. And I could tell stories about both of them way back, because I remember when they were individually in training as, shall I say, dashing young educators. And they were single. And there was always a little bit of talk about, I wonder what's going to happen to Kari. I wonder what's going to happen to Dave. And today they're here to tell you that story because it's first two people who had the opportunity to learn the principles and then to have their lives unfold. So with that introduction, I'd like you to meet two very ordinary but very special people. So Dave and Kari, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? You'll get it accurately and I might mess it up.
Sure. Kari and I, we work in the same school, work at Menominee Middle School here in Menominee, Wisconsin. And we started getting introduced with Kathy with the principals and Gary and Bonnie the late 90s. And then, as she said, we were separate at the time. We were single. And then we will tell you the story of how we got together in a little bit here. But then we were able to connect, and principals were a big part of that. And from that point, we've continued to be involved in it, and it's spilled into every avenue of our life, from our relationship to family to school and so on. And so we're very fortunate to have been a part of that and continue to be a part of it. So we want to say thanks to Kathy and Brett for putting this series on, and thank you to you, Kathy, and Gary and Bonnie for letting us have the opportunity to be involved in this process. So thank you very much.
Well, we know that Bonnie and Gary and I stood up and cheered. You said, oh yes, we will step forward and do some things in our classrooms and in the school district. So you've been a gift to us. And Kari, might you add to that? Or the two of you go in whatever direction you choose.
Well, I don't know if you want our background, our teaching background, but
please, that would be lovely.
We've both been teaching since the mid-90s. I've taught elementary school. I've taught middle school for the majority of my career as a language arts teacher and a special ed teacher. And now I've into social studies. So kind of a change for me, but it's been fun. So most of the time we've been here in the middle school. I also worked at a behavior kind of treatment center at one time as well, but my primarily has been middle school.
Yep, and I've been teaching physical education the whole time. I've been in a variety of schools, elementary, high school, now middle school. Do some coaching here at the middle school. I also coach collegiate football. I've done that for probably 11 years or so. And so it's spilled into that avenue as well. So I think that's another area that we could talk about some other point. But other than that, we've been kind of just living it through all aspects, like we said, of our life, and teaching has been a big part of it. And Kari does a lot of great things here at the school, and our school district has done some really good things.
We feel very fortunate that through our work is where we were introduced to this, that we didn't find it on our own, it kind of found us. And we took advantage of that and feel very fortunate because it's made a huge difference in our lives. And as we luckily can ride to work together a lot, and we live about a half hour away, so we have some time every day to talk about things. And we often say, I don't know when we would talk if we didn't have that time. But as we've been reflecting on this series and talking about it at different points in our life, it's remarkable when we look back and realize that, okay, we were living the principles, we were doing these things, and we just didn't have a name for it, or we didn't connect with it to the fact that it was from the training that we were starting to live this way. And it's been a godsend for us in many ways throughout our marriage and family and with our children. I mean, it's kind of, well, should we tell the story of how we met?
Yeah, we should probably tell that story a little bit. Well, Kari and I, both teaching at the same school at the time, kind of noticed each other a little bit, and we teach on opposite ends of the building. I mean, literally opposite ends of the building. And I was trying to make my way down here, find any reason I could to get to the other side of the building. And she had a bowl of candy on her desk, and there were some hot tamales in there. They're kind of like these little red hot things. And if anybody knows me, I'm not a sweets guy. I'm not a candy guy. I'm not a sugar guy. But I use that as my opportunity to talk to her a little bit. So I was like, oh, you have that candy, those hot tamales. Oh, I love those. And so then that would give me a chance to talk to her a little bit. And so I made my way down as much as I could. It was funny because we were talking about separate realities. And that's totally how it kind of delayed our relationship, actually, in separate realities, because here I'm trying to find any reason to talk to her and get to, see how she's feeling, maybe, see if she likes me or not, maybe ask her out. And
I'm just thinking, oh, he's just a nice guy. Yeah, he comes down and talks to me and stuff. But he was dating somebody else at the time.
Oh.
So I was just thinking, nice guy coming down and talking to me and stuff. And
I didn't know we were going to throw that out there.
Well, okay.
Yeah, so I was also doing lunch duty at the time. And she would always walk by the cafeteria because it's right by the office. And so I would notice the time, and she always came by about the same time. So I would walk my way over by the office just to, again, say hi and try to connect a little bit. But the kicker is that next summer now, nothing occurred that school year. And that summer I built up the courage. You know how you pace with the phone in your hand for a while, and then you finally hit that last number and you call? That's what I did. And she picked up, and we were starting to chat a little bit. And doorbell rang. And I'm like, oh, you got company? And she's like, no, that's my date. I was like, oh, no, it's terrible. So here, nothing happened that summer. And then in the next school year, then we were set up on a date together, and we had the opportunity to kind of chat a little bit more. And
He was late.
I got really bad directions. I'm just going to tell you. Yes, I was late. So it wasn't starting out great right away. But Kari was also a little nervous about the conversation we would have before this date took place.
Because you have to understand, we are total opposites. He is Mr. Coach, Mr. Football, sports. He watches ESPN all the time, and I watch CNN. I mean, we're total opposites. And so I'm like, what are we even going to talk about? I finally agreed to go on this date with him, and I'm thinking, I don't know anything about football. I don't care about football. What are we going to talk about? Well, it just so happened that week I had just had my initial training with the health resilience and the principles. And so that started out in our conversation when we started talking, and it was fantastic because we spent the whole night talking about that because he'd already had the training previously, like, I don't know, a couple months before or whatever it was. And so that really was our first initial connection, like, oh, wow, there's more to this guy than just football. And I mean, what a way to get to know somebody through the principles. It was fantastic.
Yes, it was. It was really a bonding, one of the things that really connected us early on and got us to fall in love.
So that was the start. And then we basically kept going through trainings as we were dating too. And so it just continued to be a conversation that we had from the beginning of the relationship, and then carried through. Obviously we got married and stuff, and then we had kids, and I have to apologize if you hear some noise. We're in school right now, and we're in my classroom. The door is shut, but the classes are changing, and the kids are like, want to get in the room, and they can't. So
yeah, and you might hear the bell ring. So
yeah. But anyways, with our family, when we had our first daughter.
There it is. Hold on, the bell.
Sorry. There's the bell. We had our daughter Mackenzie. She had some issues early on in her life that we continue to work with now, with some sensory processing and some anxiety, and just had some health issues when she was a baby. So she was a very difficult child, to the point where he was like, this is it. We're only having one. We're never doing this again. And it was a very trying time on us early on in our relationship. And we look back and realize that the principles are really what helped us get through that time and maintain our relationship, because one of us basically had to be with her 24/7 and trying to take care of her needs. And at the same time, trying to figure out what was going on with her and research it, and kind of listen to, when I look back, of intuition, that mother's intuition, that inner wisdom that came up during that time was everything. That's what we went with. Yeah. And he understood that was the wisdom coming through, and didn't counter me on that. He understood that, okay, this is what your gut's telling you we need to do, then let's do it. And it was unbelievable. I mean, Kari was really the one that kind of helped first even diagnose her, because they weren't sure on things. And so I did. I knew from the inside out, and I knew that's what was right. I knew that was that wisdom coming out, and so we should do that, and we did. And it was a godsend. It really was. It was unbelievable. And at the same time,
question about that, Kari, when you talk about the wisdom inside, the mother's instinct or your intuition, was that something that at the time when you were going through that period of arriving at a diagnosis, and you and Dave were talking it all through, and then he could see that it was safe to, or wise to, follow what your gut instinct was telling you? At that point, were you talking a little bit about the principles as you were going through that process, or you realized that it was the principles in operation, or did that come to you in retrospect?
I would say it was retrospect, looking back, realizing that what we were talking about and discussing, and the way I was describing my feelings and my thoughts at that time, that was where it was coming from. But we were also in trying to work full time, trying to get our lives going, that we didn't realize till later on, when things slowed down, and looking back, that, okay, we were able to go to work and keep our cool and be in the moment and be with the kids we were at during the day at school, and turn off this worry and frustration that we were dealing with our daughter. And then when we got home, we could get right back into that and go with our gut of what we thought needed to be done with that. Yeah. Regardless of what our parents, even some of the doctors were telling us, we went with our gut. And, when we could calm down and just, we did a lot of research, and then just, I'd have plenty of nights just to walk her and spend time just being in my thoughts and being in that moment and feeling the instinctual things that I knew needed to be done. And he was gracious in accepting that.
Yeah. At that point, how long had you been familiar with the principles before your child was born with this condition?
Probably only 2 or 3 years.
Okay. What I think is significant is that by that time, you had a track record of living what you had been learning. and you arrive at a, shall we call it a crisis period. It wasn't just, one day. It was a long life lasting kind of thing you were going to deal with. It sounds to me that you had already slipped into living from the principles, and that it was natural for you to respond to this situation with that understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Very much so.
I think that's important, because when Sid Banks was talking about living ordinary lives, it really was a way of talking about live your whole life and trust that this is going to serve you. Yeah, interesting. So that must have been very difficult to be working in a demanding set of 2 school jobs and then adjusting to that change at home. What happened as the years unfolded with your parenting with this child and maybe other children? I wonder.
I think with Mackenzie, with our daughter Mackenzie, things have continued to evolve, and they've been kind of cyclical, and things that she's needed, and learning to see her as who she is, see what she needs, accept that, and again, continue to follow my gut on that.
Mm-hmm.
We then were kind of getting a handle on what she, calmness in our family when we had our second child, who was then born 2 months premature. And so that again sent us into a whirlwind of things. I think looking back, we were so lucky to have had the training in the principles, and even though we didn't realize it, we were living it, because we could go home and handle the things at home, and yet we could come to school and we could be in the moment. We could let the thoughts from home go stay there and come and be, but it's also a blessing with this job. You have to be in the moment. You have to be on top of things, or you just can't function. So you have to be there with the kids if you want to be effective. And it just naturally happened for us. Again, when we look back and at the craziness of our life during those early years, how we functioned, I can only say it was because of the principles that we were living that without putting a name on it, but we were living it.
Yeah.
And it's something that too, and Kari does a good job of this, of getting these principles to our children and using them with our kids and having that common language and being able to understand where they're at and recognizing, where they're at in their thought and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's really, really helped us out quite a bit. And our kids, they'll use the same language we do. And so it's kind of funny, actually. They'll know when they're in that mindset of busy mind, busy thinking, all that kind of stuff. We utilize the chairs. We utilize the chairs with them. It's a visual that they know. I know some speakers in the past, I think Rita or someone had brought it up last time. And so there's just little things like that we use with our children as well, and students, of course.
How old are you now?
Oh, our daughter's 12, will be 13 soon, and our son is 10.
Okay. And when did you start talking the language of the principles to them?
Pretty early.
Pretty early. Mackenzie was going through a lot of therapy when she was little, and we were using kind of a number system of where she was at for her anxiety and things like that, which was basically getting her to recognize her state of mind.
Yeah.
So we kind of put some different names on it for her, and when she was kind of in a tornado of thoughts and she couldn't explain it, she would just call it that yucky feeling. And so when they were little, we kind of let them put words on it that meant something to them. And then as they got older, we started giving them the actual vocabulary of what it's called. And as we got further into our training, we continued to bring that training home to them and use the actual language and vocabulary of it, to the point where now she's a teen, hitting those teen years, and gets rather annoyed with some of those things.
Yes.
And maybe I just want to be in chair 5, mom, right now, so just leave me alone, and those kind of things. So it's been interesting to watch with them.
Yes.
How they're picking up on it, and at different stages how they kind of buy into it, and then now we're seeing the teenage years where they're just anything we say annoys them. So
and she'll even tell us when we're in chair 5. It's amazing. So
that we have found that with our kids and with middle school kids teaching, we have a poster of a person sitting in, there's 5 chairs, if you're not familiar with this. And the first one is when you're basically in clear channel. And we talk to them about, you're in clear channel, you have access to your wisdom. This is the chair you want to be in when you're taking a test, when you're confronting someone, someday when you take your driver's test, those sorts of things. And then the chairs continue for the person. They kind of dissipate, and their thinking kind of overtakes them till they get to the last chair, and they're just a puddle of thoughts, or basically we say a tornado. Mm-hmm. And that poster and that idea of getting kids to recognize their state of mind, and then be able to realize that this isn't everything happening to me, this was my thoughts that created this, has been very beneficial to us. And I use it all the time with our kids at home and with the middle school kids. That's the thing that they grasp onto the most. Mm-hmm. I also deal with some students in my class that have anxiety issues. And because my daughter obviously deals with that, a lot of the kids in the middle school kind of get funneled into my room. And it's a great way for me to help them assess where they're at, and they get the language. It's been a fabulous tool for us. So
sure.
When you have people ask the perennial question that comes up all the time, well, how early can a child be taught the principles? What would you say? And I don't mean in school, I mean any point in life. When can a child begin to learn?
I think it starts the day they're born. I think the day they're born, and how a child is going to role model the environment you create, and they're going to role model how you handle situations. And before they're even verbal enough to speak that, they are picking that up from you. They are seeing that. And, I even remember at times when Mackenzie was really little, and some of her anxiety, she needed to be attached to me like 24/7, to the point where it was exhausting, and love her to death, but it could be exhausting. There were times when I would just say, mommy needs to take a time out. Mommy needs to just go chill out and calm myself for a minute. And I would just go in the other room and mommy just needs 10 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever. And she picked up on that when she was little, and just knew that, okay, well, that's what you do when you're starting to get, upset or need to calm yourself. You just remove yourself and do what you need to do to get your own health back. And I would say even things to her, as they got older and start to hit that sassy age and stuff, and you come home from work and you're tired, and you've been dealing with middle school kids all day, and your patience are low, and I would say things to them sometimes like, okay, well, I need to go take a break before I say something that I might regret to you, because I love you and I just need a break for a minute. So let's give me 5 minutes and I'll come back and discuss that with you. And I think just role modeling those things to kids day in and day out, and showing them that, you're not perfect either. Or, there were times when maybe I did lose it, and I would come back later and say, I'm really sorry. That wasn't okay. I kind of lost it, and I kind of went to chair 5 there, didn't I? And remember, when we're in chair 5, we kind of do and say things we normally wouldn't do. That's what happened, and I'm sorry. And being honest with kids and showing them that, you're always going to have times in life when things get tough, and you go into that tornado of thoughts, and you maybe say or do things that you regret. But teaching them that you don't need to stay there, that you need to recognize it and move on, that's human. That it's not that you can ever avoid having that tornado. You just need to not stay in it.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember over the many years of coming into your district was that sometimes, let me say, administrators who might not have learned the principles would be bothered severely by the fact that someone may have, some staff member may have participated in a series of principles training and then been back on the job, and on a given day lose it. And the administrators sometimes had an understanding that that never should happen if the training was worth anything. Can you talk about that? You know, what's it like in the school system? Because in a sense, what you've said about your children learning is also true of all the adults that ever learn this understanding of the principles.
Well, you know, as a teacher, you have to be able to let things go. And I think recognizing your thoughts is huge. It's huge for me for sure. Because you can't bring what happens in one class to the next. And you only have, 3 minutes between classes? So, you know, you can't carry it with you. You can't take it. You got to be able to let things go and know that, you know, those are just thoughts, and you can choose a different one. You don't have to hang on to it. You don't have to squeeze it and then let it affect you for the next class and the next class. And I think we all know people that are like that. You know, they want to almost live in that drama almost, you know, and have that chaos in their life. They can't let go. Something happens to them in first hour and it affects them the whole day. And that's all you hear about. And the next class just gets hammered because they're already squeezing so tight to the negative thought that the next class suffers then too. So I think in terms of recognizing your thought and knowing that you can choose to hang on to something or let it go, it's huge.
That's huge.
And I think that, you know, when you're talking about people who know that we've been taught in the principles and had the training, and it used to be in this district that there was a good, you know, majority of people had the training and were familiar with it. And that's becoming, you know, less and less as people have retired and new people are coming in. Mm-hmm. And I think as we talk to people about it and as they learn about it, you know, the principals, the administrator that we have here is very understanding of it. There are, I'm sure, other people in the district who don't get it and expect us to be at this level all the time and to not make mistakes and to not get upset and that sort of thing. But as people get educated on it, the more they understand that. And I think even if they see that, okay, well, you made a mistake, maybe you went to chair 5, how you handle it after that point right. also is showing them the principles in work. When we, in 6th grade, my teaching partner and I do a 2-week unit on the principles with our students. And one of the big focuses that we have with them, especially being middle school kids, is you're going to lose it sometimes. That's normal. It's okay. But you have to recognize it. You have to own it. Nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. You have to own it. You have to take responsibility for it and move on and not stay in that spot. And the more we educate the students on that, so basically all of our 6th grade students have had the training now the last 2 years. And it used to be prior to that, they did it in a health class, and the health teacher did a fabulous job of doing it. But of course, with budget cuts and everything else, our health class was cut. And so luckily, we've been able to pick up that slack in social studies and teach the kids through that class.
Yeah. If I can interject something here about systems change. You reference the health class, and we know that Wendy Hastings and Nancy Wilcox Horner taught that together for many years. And when we count back, we can say it is literally in the thousands of 7th grade kids that they were able to do what they were at that time calling the health realization component for a couple of weeks with all the 7th grade kids. And I want people to know that over the years, we've all run into stories where someone who was a seventh grader has now become an adult, maybe even has children. And there have been many instances where those seventh graders turned adult have talked about how that little bit of 2 weeks of learning actually has stayed with them into their marriages, into their parenting. And I think I want people everywhere to know that even a small component in a curriculum, a couple of weeks of 50-minute sessions taught by people who really are grounded in the principles, can be life-changing. We always had a vision that we hoped that that would be occurring in every single grade for the entire time a child was in school, from kindergarten to 12th grade. That would be wonderful. I keep envisioning what I call a comprehensive K-12 curriculum, so that by the time someone graduates from high school, they are as competent in understanding their own mental well-being, their health, as they are in all of the other educational objectives that they have to meet. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience beginning to do some teaching with staff, some of the mini workshops that you did for a period of time.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to say too about, the educating not just the students, but the teachers and administrators in the district, I think it's been huge for us here in Menominee. I mean, we can talk to another professional and utilize the same kind of common language, and everybody knows what we're talking about. And so I think that is good too. I mean, there's people that, so unquote, get it and understand and have a good base in the principles, and it helps to communicate, as educators as well. And that's one of the things we were fortunate enough to do is a refresher course with advanced resiliency that Kathy allowed us to do to people in our community, people in our schools, teachers, administrators, social workers, all that kind of stuff were involved into this mini advanced group refresher course. And so Kari and I were able to take, I think it was 3 classes, if I remember right, 3 different sessions. And then we went through and kind of refreshed everything from, just the inside out to all the way to gratitude, and the 3 principles, and a pretty comprehensive refresher course with our teachers, administrators, and community.
There was a dream in the back of my head years and years and years ago where I waited for the day when classroom teachers would end up being the facilitators of principals training programs. And I remember the day you both said, yes, we'll do it. And I went home and I went, yay, 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 because it was the first time that we had experienced educators who were not afraid of presenting. You do that all the time. Your trepidation, as I recall, was whether you could address the subject of the principles. So that whole worry about can I present was gone. And it was just a matter of just providing a tiny bit of support, some materials, some time frame, that kind of stuff. And you guys were off and running. And it was a wonderful thing to watch. It was kind of my dream come true, because I think there's a real special professional expertise that teachers always have. And I wanted to see that come alive in teaching the principles. It's quite lovely. At some point, I'm going to ask Bonnie Scheel to make a contribution in terms of what she has seen standing to the side and watching Dave and Kari operate in the educational setting. What's the impact of that, Bonnie?
It's been phenomenal to have two experienced educators who really are speaking the language and supporting kids and supporting their peers throughout the district. It's been really a privilege to work with them and see them use what they know, as well as with kids, with each other. It's always a joy watching and listening to them because they share so well what goes on and how it's effective for all of us.
Yeah. I know, Bonnie, that you do a number of things in the district. So if you can just, in a brief way, explain to people the role that you've had. And for those of you that are listening in, Bonnie and Gary and I go way back about 20 plus years, almost 25 years, working with this school district. And it's just amazing that here Gary and Bonnie sit today still involved. So over those years, what are two or three of the main things that you have dedicated your energy to in terms of bringing the principals into your school system?
The primary thing is just that when we first were introduced to the principals back in the 90s, we saw the value of bringing it back to this district. I grew up in this community and went through this school from kindergarten through 12th grade, and my heart is here. And this is something that has great value for everyone that lives here and grows up here. So I've had an opportunity to work through my education and moving into the area of prevention, as well as always focusing on positive youth development, resilience. That's been a continuous focus throughout all of my work career. I've now got an opportunity to work with before and after school programs, as well as continue with the prevention efforts. But the focus of all of those, the heart, is within the principals and the application to our community and our school and every child that lives here. So it's just an incredible passion, and the ability to share that outside of our district with other districts has also been very valuable. So I'm very grateful.
Can you give people a snapshot of what the principals have meant to you in your personal life?
Well, when I started with my education, before I bumped into the principals, I was already a single parent with a child with learning disabilities who attempted suicide twice. And I had an opportunity to live the principles throughout my life with my children. It is the way that I have found for them to understand when things in their lives are getting complicated. They can always give mom a call, and mom will say, is that real? Is that just a thought? How do we get quiet? And it's just that calming influence. It's also taught me to get off the corner of the couch, and instead of being a pile of thinking, to actually get up and move again and live life. So it's made an incredible difference in my entire life. And I hope everyone can have an opportunity to learn and apply the principles to their life, because it really improves the long-term quality for everyone that you connect with.
Bonnie, when I first met you way back, there were some health issues that were showing up for you, and then they dissipated. Can you talk about that just very briefly?
Yeah, initially when I bumped into the principals, I was just coming off from separating from my husband, single parenting with 3 children, 11 and under. And I'd just been in a car accident where I had a back and a neck injury, which as a result of all of that stress, I also developed alopecia and lost the hair over my entire body, which was very interesting because I also had still within me, I knew that it was okay and could continue going forth with life. And since understanding the principles and really applying them and living them through the past 20 years, I have not had a reoccurrence of alopecia. That usually my hair goes white off and on, but there's still color in it, and I'm almost 65. So the principles has improved quality of life for myself as well as my family.
Bonnie is both a professional and a family member who's really on a mission to bring the principles to just everybody. And I've heard the most lovely stories of her teaching her little tiny grandchildren the principles. So I think, you know, the point that we're making here is that Dave and Kari are educators. Bonnie's an educator. And when you live the understanding of the principles across all fronts of your life, educators end up teaching parents, either parents of children in the school, parents of your own family, you know, just all of that. We're deeply in already in the position to do that. So you want to, for those of you that are not educators, but you are deeply dedicated to bringing the principles to school, I think what I'm wanting to say is that the most important thing that you might consider thinking about is that when you do have an opportunity as an outside consultant to work with even one educator inside of the school system, remember that that person is there for all of professional life. So if you reach that one educator, you're tapping a huge resource. That educator has multiple roles: family, school, community. Bonnie's talking about living her entire life in this school community. And that means a lot, because when she went to, shall we say, recruit participants for training, she was calling on friends and colleagues and neighbors and people that she had grown up with. And that brings a quality that you cannot get in any other way. So Dave and Kari, I would invite you in a few minutes to field questions from people, but before we do that, I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about what the main lessons that you think you have learned about integrating the principles into your own teaching practice. What's the top little list of this is what you try to remember, or this is what you know is important for educators to learn and hold on to?
I think for me, when I'm working with kids, and even when I look back to when I first taught, I think it was there a little bit, but it's just grown with me as I've grown as an educator, to just see that every kid has that wisdom in them, to see that in them. And I was fortunate along the way to have some other teachers that I worked with when I taught 7th grade, Chris Ost and Steve Tillison, who are also very much involved with the principals and the training. And they were role models to me. And I learned a lot from them on seeing kids in a different light and how to bring out that wisdom in them and not get in a power struggle with kids. And I think being in the moment, and when kids can tell that you're truly listening to them and that you truly care about them, their world changes, your world changes, and you can make a huge difference in how you educate a kid if you can just truly be in the moment with them and listen to them. And they can recognize that in a heartbeat. They can sense a teacher that's just kind of hanging there and going through the motions and saying things and not really believing them. And if you look at a kid and really see the good things in them, they come miles in what they can do in school.
And like Kari said, you know, listening in neutral like that without judgment, that's one of the big things. If they know you're not judging them or already, you know, putting something, you know, thoughts in your mind about that kid before you even give them a chance to communicate with you, I think, you know, that listening in neutral is huge as well, you know, and all the little things, just knowing it's inside out and knowing that kids do have that ability, that innate wisdom, and to know even what wrong and right is, even they may not always exercise it right, but it's there. And so you can communicate with them a little bit better that way as well. And I know it's not personal. You know, we deal with middle school kids. So I think we should get extra pay, Lori Smith. I'm just saying, Okay. But I mean, they're ball hormones. First of all, they're immature, egocentric, you name it, it's all there. And the things they say and do in today's world is a little bit crazy, but to know it's not personal, be able to push that aside and know that the kid, deep down is a good kid, and they will find that inside that health for themselves as they go, and it's our job to help them out.
Yeah.
Middle school is one separate reality after another, and
Yes.
giving them that language has been really helpful too, because there's constantly drama between kids, and you're dealing with those conflicts, and reminding them that, well, is this a separate reality, do you think, and what do you think happened here, and let's go back and look at the thoughts that led up to this, and they get it.
Yeah.
If you can slow them down long enough,
Right.
to talk with them about it.
Yeah. See how they see it, and then, well, look, here's what I see, and just be able to communicate that with them. I think that helps out immensely in terms of being able to have a good quality communication with the student.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, for each of you, what would you say would be one success that you had with a student where it kind of sticks with you of, oh my, I don't believe that we made that much progress. Wow.
My biggest success story with a student is probably one with anxiety again. And I had him when I taught 7th grade. When he was in 6th grade, he had a really rough time, and they were thinking about possibly pulling him out and homeschooling him. And when we met with the mother, and I think I truly listened to her. I wasn't judging her, and partly because I had a child myself with anxiety and could relate with that. But just asking her thoughts and what she thought would work for her kid, and including her in that, because she knows her child, and including the child in it. Okay, well, explain to me what happens to you, because he would get very anxious and it would come to tears. And in middle school, that's like social craziness to cry in front of other kids, especially if you're a boy. And then he would want to flee the room. And so, we worked through that, and we would talk about, ways that, when he would recognize when he was getting to that point, and things he could do to help quiet his mind. And we figured out that for him, if he could just go read a book for 5 minutes, he could zone into that book and get himself back down to a chair that, chair one, we would call it. And it worked for him. And, he had good days and bad days, and we recognized when things were happening, there would be transitions that he would need to know ahead of time. And we listened to him and what he needed and what would work for him. And every year there were new things that would come up, and we would attack it the same way and go, okay, but remember last year when you didn't think you could do this, and wow, look at the progress you made. You did do it. And reminding him of that confidence and that he had it in him to do it. And again, working with the parent, it was all of us together. And he just graduated high school and is actually in college. And the mother, called and said, I don't think he would have even made it through school if we hadn't worked with him in 7th grade and helped him through that time.
Yeah. I find it so important that you just automatically involved the mother and assumed that she would know, just as you had known, what some of the right things to do with the situation would be. And of course, the child. Yeah.
And she was so thankful just to have somebody, just to listen to her. That she had said in the past when she would try to work with people to help him, that he just needed certain accommodations and it would work. But people were so quick to judge her that it was something she did as a parent, or something, there was a fault in it someplace. And just listening to her and not judging her just opened up this whole way of her to help me problem solve, because she could let that stuff go and she could truly think about, okay, yeah, you know what? This probably would work for him.
Yeah. Not long ago, I was on vacation and had luxury to pull out one of my old favorite books, and I came across a line that just sticks with me today as you're talking, and that is that we can listen someone into existence. We can listen them into health, if you will. And it all depends on whether you believe that's there. Otherwise, we'd be jumping in and trying to stir it up and say, this is how you do things. But that listening from a secure place of wisdom and trust and hope is huge. Dave, a success for you?
There's so many, Kathy, so many. We have FIAD's a little bit different group, an area than a regular classroom, so to speak. There's lots of chaos, a lot of things going on, and some kids really struggle with that setting. And there's a few kids I tend to get, some of the more behaviorally challenged type of kids, kids that are a little more explosive, a little more quick to get to chair 5, so to speak. And what I've found is this particular student is just like that. He's a chair 5 kid immediately. He's very defiant to a lot of other staff members. He doesn't handle losing or team things as well as you probably should, things like that. And so what I've been able to do through a little bit of time is to create kind of a bond there with him just by talking to him like a person sometimes, listening
to him like a person.
Yeah, because otherwise he does things and gets people so upset at him immediately, and they jump to like a response that's probably, gonna go to the office, a disciplinary referral, this or that, or go take time out or do this. And I've had the opportunity to just talk with him and share, like, what were you thinking here? Like, try to get into his mind a little bit about his thoughts and what's creating his reality and why. And most of the time, some of these kids come to school and they're already in a bad place. And realizing that, knowing that, and being able to kind of communicate with that student and find out where his head is at, find out his state of mind, try to get him down to a place where he can think and not be in chair 5 and not be disruptive and defiant and want to leave and just go somewhere. And so I've had him where even during my prep, he's left the class he was in and has come down and sat with me the entire time during my prep just to come down and chat and kind of calm down, so to speak, or relax and get back to chair 1. And it's been effective for him, even when I wasn't his teacher. So,
yeah. Does he seek you out, or did he seek you out on his own?
On his own, yep.
Yeah, I think that's a vital piece, because in the resilience research, it's certainly established, and in our own experiences, we've seen this too, that people are drawn to the health that they feel and see being around another person. And so the importance of having, let's say, a school building where there's a whole smattering of teachers that understand state of mind, that every person has wisdom, that we are in and out of, stressful places and calm places. It's almost as if by having those, quote, expert bodies sprinkled all over the building, you build in a safety net. And I think of some districts where there's excessive violence inside the school. There are academic problems. Administrators are not certain what to do, and they're jumping at all kinds of programs from SEL, PBIS, mindfulness, which are all fine, but they are outside in as opposed to inside out. And when you begin to focus on the health of the helper, it really changes the environment in the school building in the way you just described. And kids will seek that out. We know from research that folks are drawn to that healthy place. They'll find the resources that they need if they're visible enough and available enough. I'm ready to begin to accept some questions. So if some of you in the listening audience choose to raise your hand, I'll be watching for that. And at this point, I think while we're waiting for people to get their thoughts together, I might just ask Dave and Kari to talk just a little bit about, so how does a couple relationship work when you both have what I'm going to say is a solid long-term experience of living from the principles? What happens? Because you're not perfect people. What happens?
Well, probably the greatest thing is that we recognize when the other person is not in a good state of mind, and we don't push their buttons. Unless we want to, tick them off on purpose, then you know when to do it. But that has probably saved our marriage a million times over, because we can recognize when the other person is going there, and we know things are going to make that person go there. And so we can kind of help avoid that situation or just back off. And that's something that we teach the kids too. I mean, Mackenzie will want to do something and need Dave for something, and I'll say, well, do you think he's in a good spot right now that you really want to go ask him that right now? And maybe it was, he was upset about something, and she'd be like, maybe I better wait till later. Or, to recognize that in each other's huge. And I mean, we've got some stories that where we've lost it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share
one that you dare to share?
Which one are you thinking? Oh, well, yeah, there is one story that I think would be entertaining for you. It was a definitely busy thinking and a stressful time, and one where we could have went there but chose not to, and recognized.
I did go there.
Well, a few times. But natural. The story is actually one about lice.
Lice?
Yeah.
Lice.
Head lice.
Head lice.
Okay.
First off, I'm a very type A personality, if you can't tell, and I like things neat and clean and orderly. And head lice about sent me, our daughter had gone to she's in dance, and they had a dance sleepover with all the dancers together and sleeping bags all together, and came home, and I didn't think to check her head for lice, but a few days later, one of the other mothers texted me and said, you might want to check Mackenzie for lice. My daughters both got lice from the dance sleepover party. So he's at football practice. I immediately go and check Mackenzie's hair, and I see stuff, and I'm freaking out. So I take all of us to the urgent care to have them check to verify if this is head lice or not. I'm calling him on the phone, leaving him frantic messages. Oh my gosh, we might have lice, and freaking out. So by the time he comes home, we are back from urgent care. They've basically kind of, stick you in a room, and they don't really want to touch you. So, it's like, ugh. But got all the stuff, came home. He's walking in the door, and I'm losing it. I'm in chair 5. I'm losing it. This is 2 weeks before school starts.
Yep.
He's in full-blown football with college football doing 2-a-days. So he's gone until like 10 o'clock every night, and I'm on my own. And our daughter, of course, has anxiety, and I'm definitely not helping her at this point because I'm losing it. And yeah. So he walks in,
recognized what was going on in the situation, and could immediately relieve her of those duties a little bit, to give her a little time and space, and do what we can. And I mean, if you know about lice, it's crazy, and you have to get everything. You have to get not just lice, but the nits and then all that stuff off their hair. And it's just, and our daughter had long hair too. I mean, it was just incredibly crazy, and it takes hours. Mm-hmm. So we would be able to recognize where each other was at through this process, and be able to work through it. But it was definitely lengthy and time consuming. I mean, we went to the point where we had the shampoo in, and then had these bonnets, shower caps on our heads, and we had to put plastic over our pillows and sleep in the living room on towels. And it was just crazy. Everything at our house was like bagged up and put somewhere in plastic for a certain amount of time. It was unbelievably crazy.
I got a little extreme in if they recommended, 48 hours to bag something up, I doubled everything.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it was nuts. And
It was.
our poor son was starting a new school in 2 weeks, so we couldn't shave his head because we didn't want to have him to be embarrassed. And our
Right.
daughter, again, was starting a new school as well, and had this long hair and crying because we couldn't cut it because she's in dance and she needs to be able to put it up. And so literally spent between 10 and 12 hours the first day going hair by hair and pulling out the little nits and cutting them out and
Until you
stuff.
yelled for the scissors.
Yeah, and then I screamed for Dave one time, bring me the scissors! And I cut off a big strip of her hair. But it was, looking back though, once we got over the initial shock of it, or I did, and I could breathe again, there was some quality time that I ended up having with my kids before the craziness of school started, because they had to sit with me for hours as I went through their hair, and we just sat in the bathroom and I went through their hair and we talked. So looking back, it was kind of a blessing. I got some quality time with my kids because they couldn't move. They had to sit there.
Yeah.
And, had to apologize to them for losing it and for screaming about lice and freaking out. And, I said, I lost it. I'm sorry, and they got it.
And it was a good communication point too. I mean, we could talk to them about that then and all that stuff. And then we almost had another scare because a kid came over not long, like a month later or something like that. And
our son's friend came over to come for a play date, and he walks in and he's got kind of a longer hair.
And we made a point of checking people when they come in, whoever's coming over, just so you know, for a little while.
We're a little paranoid.
We had to check the kid out. And yeah, he had lice.
Yeah.
And so Kari's like, Dave, you take him right now.
I made him go outside on the deck right away because I saw the lice. And then, of course, I go get him. And
yes. And so then I had they were at the other kid in their family was at a soccer park a mile away or so. And so then we kind of packed him up and drove him over back to the soccer area. And I had to explain to his dad that your son has lice and it hasn't been taken care of. And you have to get all the nits.
Freaking out.
Yeah. My wife's freaking out right now. So here you go. And I need to go back. So it was quite an experience, and it was very interesting. But you want to talk about you having to use the principles when something like that happens in those situations, and the timing, that it happened right before school, change of schools, me and 2 days football in college. It was a crazy time. And so I think if it weren't for the principles, I don't know how we would have made it.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening, one of the things that has been important in a community where many people were learning the principles over long periods of time and applying their understanding in their jobs, living it in their personal lives. One of the things that made a difference in all of those trainings was that people would come back together. They'd have a couple days of training, have a month off, and then another 1 day and another month off, and then come back. That was the basic introductory training, kind of similar when we did the advanced too. But one thing that we always included in that process was an opening time for people to tell each other what they had been noticing in their own lives about the principles at play. And there was this incredible, rich collection at every event where individuals would come in and with some time to reflect back on what had happened to them, they could tell stories that were as gripping as this, and then draw it to a tight closure and say, and here's what it is about this understanding called the principles that allowed me to get back on track. So everybody that came into the room was a teacher, a facilitator. And some of those stories have literally changed the language in the community. They've changed the way people relate to each other, and some of those stories last for a lifetime. I can recall many, just as you're telling this one today. But I strongly encourage people who are listening in now to pose some questions if you would like to, or to make a comment. What has touched a chord with you as you've been listening? What question might you have? And as you know, I'm pretty good at just sitting here and spotting someone that I think has an idea cooking, and I will call on you in a minute. But if you choose to, at this point, let me see your hands go up. And if not, I'm going to, oops, wrong one. Marika, you're sitting there with a contented smile. And I know you go way back to those Salt Springs days, and we're talking about, in some ways, different language than was used in those early days. What are you noticing? What's kind of in your heart today?
I'm finding it quite fascinating to see how it has gone through your community there. That is something I have not experienced because I'm, as you have said to me before, the lone duck in my district. And I just love the stories of how you've worked together, how you've been able to collaborate and district-wide get different people at different levels in the school district, all training together and learning this. And you know, when you mentioned thousands of students now that have been through some kind of training over the years and the results, that's just incredible. You know, I just love to hear like it's a stellar story, you know, it's an example of what's possible in more places if the right people are able to hear, right? So I think that's fantastic. I'm also touched by the commonality and down-to-earthness, which I resonate with Dave and Kari's stories too. You know, our humanity is what it is, and through a little bit of understanding of the principles, it always saves our bacon one way or another, right? It's always there to rely on, you know, and life does continue to present challenges. It's not that once you've been in it so long that it's a smooth sail. I continue to have confrontation in different areas of my life where I'm guided to look back to what's inside because that's the only place to go sometimes. Mm-hmm. And just to notice the thinking, you know, like sometimes things that go on are so compelling, whether it's in the classroom or with youth in the community. And but when it comes back to noticing, it's our thinking about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And just to notice, you know, that's all we have to do. It's not, that's where you start. That's where you start. And from that place of noticing, you find a nicer feeling. And in that nicer feeling, that's what guides me to know how to act. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when there's so much going on, there's bewilderment in some situations, you have to just sit back and just notice it's just my perception. Mm-hmm. And be grateful for that noticing and not to be pulled in. Mm-hmm. And that's where clarity begins to shine. So, and I just see, you know, what you shared today kind of made me reflect on that too, right? It's all kinds of things go on in all our lives, whether it's health issues. I'm also facing health issues, different things going on. But that's not the big picture. That's just a detail. What's really going on is that spiritual existence, you know, how we, it's what we have, that's what has our backs, right? Often out there's all kinds of things that go on, but to be able to reflect back on our true connection and our gratitude for it, that's what carries us forward.
Mm-hmm. I'm
So
glad that you phrase it that way, and I interrupted you. So perhaps, did you want to say a little bit more, Marika?
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm glad that you actually use the word spirituality, because I think, and I might ask Bonnie and Dave and Kari to talk about this just a little bit, but when we talk about the importance of, shall we say, just getting quiet or waiting or not acting rashly, the reason for that is that we are giving ourselves an opportunity to connect to, as Kari said, with that wisdom that is born into us.
Mhm.
And in a school setting, we have to find a variety of ways to talk about that. But we know that there's not a person, there's not a human being working or participating in a school system that doesn't have that wisdom, and that it's very formless, it's always accessible. And in schools, we probably need to take special care as to how we name that or talk about it. But I'm very grateful that as we did the work in Menominee, we had the opportunity to be supported by the well-respected works of Parker Palmer. Because he was writing something called The Courage to Teach. And he was essentially pointing to the spiritual dimension of educators and students' lives. And that gave us license without much difficulty to be able to literally talk about mind as being in a spiritual dimension when we would talk about the principles. And we were very clear to say, we are not treading into your private personal religion or the way that you put your beliefs or your participation in faith communities together. That's very private. But being able to say that that wisdom is present in every child, and give the teacher the opportunity to find their own way with those words. So that, for example, Dave and Kari, you were comfortable figuring out a way to point children, shall I say, back this way, or back this way if you want, to that source of wisdom. And I'm curious, if for the two of you, how you think about the language that you use when you're pointing children to the spiritual that is with them in the way I've just now talked about it. How do you navigate that in a school setting?
When we teach the lessons to our sixth graders, we start out the lesson and the unit talking about that wisdom, that everybody's born with this wisdom inside of them. And I don't know who it was. I didn't come up with the idea myself. I maybe got the idea from Wendy or Nancy, but I turn down the lights in the classroom and I get a big flashlight. And then I have the kids take a moment and just think about all the things that are stressful to them, that take up a lot of their thinking, that they focus on and stuff, and either on tissue paper or something. And then I have them come and bring those up and put those over the top of the flashlight. And we talk about how, you have that wisdom inside of you, but all of these things that happen to us in life and that are going on in our mind and stuff can sometimes cover up that wisdom and make it harder, but it's always there. It's never gone. It's always there. Or just like we talk about how the sun's always there, even though it might be cloudy out, but the sun is behind it. And that's their wisdom, that they always have it with them no matter what. And it's just a matter of when you get calm, you can take those layers away and that wisdom can come up. But when you get in that tornado of thoughts, that's like all of those tissues going on that flashlight, and it's dimming that wisdom. So you don't have access to that, to be able to problem solve and to be able to figure things out. And that's why sometimes you do or say things you regret, where if you can get to a calmer state of mind, you have that wisdom. And so having that visual for kids works really well. And we just call it a wisdom, that you're just born with this wisdom inside of you, and everybody has it. We don't say anything about religion and things like that with they're sixth graders, so we don't go that way.
Of course.
But they get it.
Yeah, they do get it. Dave, any comments along those lines?
I experienced that particular kind of method of getting that point across, that analogy. We actually did it together at, what was it?
We presented at a student council,
student council
event at the university one day. And
Yep,
we kind
and
of
we
did the
shared
same
flashlights
activity with them. And
Yep. And we had them use cell phones because they all have flashlights on them. So they all do their own in a small group. But I thought it was very powerful. I thought it was a good way to get the kids to understand that. I mean, the tissue paper that kept building up, and then being able to let it go, and boom, there's the light. It's still there. It's always been on. It didn't go off. It didn't turn off. So I really like that one. I don't have one particularly of my own that's better than that. That's for sure.
And I want those of you listening in to notice something that Dave just kind of casually said. When we went up to the university to present to the student council at the university, is that what you were saying?
Mhm.
Yes.
Out. Now, I want you to understand that oftentimes educators inside of systems are called on to be presenters in community organizations or institutions. So again, I come back to, for those of you who are consultants, never underestimate the power of making a connection with one educator. Because if that educator gets it and begins to live it, then it opens, in a sense, a toolbox, a group of partners that you can work with. And in truth, I was a consultant from the outside. I had an education background of sorts, the degree, but university teaching. And so coming into that situation, the task always was to simply ignite the power of the educators inside of the system, and they will run with it. As we're getting close to the end, let's see, Gary, I see you had a comment. Could I come back to you? And were you going to make a comment, Gary?
Sure. I simply just wanted to say about the amazement of a system that creates or supports all of this amazing work. And the three people that have spoken today, Bonnie and Kari and Dave, are all so amazing in their own ability just to be themselves and to naturally exude this understanding and to then make the impact that they're making on a whole system. And the other part is that there are a number of other people within that same system that have that same amazing ability to articulate this understanding and to share what they understand. So I guess I'm just in awe of what I'm hearing today, and just so grateful for their willingness just to do that so naturally without any pretense or regard for themselves, but just so naturally to shine that light into the world that they live in and then work in and touch so many lives. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Bonnie, I'm wondering, as we get close to closing, and I want people who hear this recording to be aware of what it's really like to work inside a school system. In order for Dave and Kari to be both on this screen today, they had to arrange for other people to take their classes during this period of time. They were going to broadcast out of a storage closet because that's all there was. And they made the hard decision to ask a colleague to take Kari's students during this time. So the reality of being in a school is that every minute and every bit of space is used and then some. And Bonnie, if you could share just what happened in your last week in terms of what it means to be one who knows the principles and see a need in the community. What did you have to do? Because this is real life in schools.
Well, there are complications often that happen in schools and communities. And one of our fellow communities where we've have a number of trained staff suffered over spring break time. Two former students who were in their early 20s, late teens, were both killed in separate car accidents over a week's period of time, as well as a community member was arrested for sexually molesting high school students in the same school. It's a very small community, and the staff reached out to a few of us that have been trained in the past and that have worked with them and said, our administrators say, we've got counseling help coming in for the students and for this and that, but we really need to have reminders about the principles. We need some support. So a number of us have started to meet together for a couple hours every couple weeks just to support and remind each other that the health of the helper is incredibly important, and that what we bring to the students in our community goes beyond just us, but we also have to maintain that health. So that's what they've seen is very valuable for them, and I am really grateful that I have the ability to work with them.
Thank you, Bonnie. The point I think here is that educators have to ever be on the ready. And as we come to a close here, Dave and Kari, we have probably 3 minutes. And I'm wondering if there's something that each of you might like to say as we come to a close today. Is there something that comes to mind?
Well, I guess for me, I'm just so blessed to have had this opportunity to learn these principles, because not only does it help myself in my own personal life and the daily things that I do and that come across my desk, but it helped our relationship, continues to help our relationship and our family. My teaching's better. I just feel very blessed and grateful that I've got to work with people that know it, work with people that understand it, as well as live with someone that understands it.
Live with someone that understands it. Great.
Well, and I would say the same thing. I'm really happy that I've now had the opportunity to be teaching kids about it more, every year doing this. Wendy and Nancy did a fantastic job for the years that they had the health class and could do it. And I'm really enjoying that time of teaching kids about it and doing it in a specific, time frame and when I started out, I tell them, this is probably the most important thing I'm going to teach you all year. And this is something that's going to help you for your whole life. And I get so much out of it, seeing their reactions and how they're taking in the information and how they'll come up to me and say, well, I had a really crazy weekend, but I went to, my happy place that you talked about and how you got myself back down to chair one, and they come and tell you, kids that are quiet the whole time, you're not sure if they're really getting it, and then they'll come up and tell you something and you're like, they got it, they're getting it. And it's so rewarding, and it's fantastic.
And you even had a student that was trying to teach their mom what they learned.
Kids at conference time, a lot of the parents said their kids were trying to teach them about it and wanted to know more about it. So, and again, the idea that we're in the same building and have so many people, I use him a lot. When I have a student who's going to chair 5 and just needs to get out and move, I'll say, oh, here, can you go bring Mr. Decker our car keys? I forgot to give them to him this morning. And then they got to walk all the way down to the FIED, and he kind of knows that's a signal, like he doesn't really need the keys, but he knows he needs to have this kid do something and move. And so it's that people in a community or in a school all knowing and getting it, it's so beneficial for everyone involved. And we're very, very fortunate and appreciate it. The gratitude is there.